Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. And special thanks to the panelists for taking the time to be with us and Backbase for sponsoring this webinar. With digital banking gaining traction across Asian markets, the Philippine Central Bank has pushed through its own digital banking framework recently. The move was, of course, unsurprising to many because of the country's large digital population that's underserved by the FSI sector. Since the introduction of the framework, the Philippines digital banking scene has attracted various local and international players as well. Among those is UNObank, which describes itself as a next generation bank built from the ground up, which was done in partnership with the likes of Backbase, Mambu, and AWS. But how does one build a digital bank from scratch? Today, joining us to talk about this, we have Manish Bhai, the CEO of UNObank, on top of the screen there. We have Riddhi Dutta, who is the regional head for ASEAN and India and Backbase. We have Myles Bertrand below him, who is the managing director for APAC in Mambu. And below Myles, we have Pete Murray, who is the head for FSI in ASEAN Amazon Web Services. Thank you for joining us, guys. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to have you all here.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Vince.
So I think you're welcome. Happy to have you here. So I think most of us, not many of us can say this in our lifetime that we've been part of building a digital bank from scratch. So that must be a pretty interesting experience. So why don't you walk us through what that was like? And maybe we can start with Manish, and Manish can also set some context to the audience in terms of what UNObank is and what UNObank is trying to do in the market. Manish, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vincent. First of all, thank you for having me and having all of us here. Let me start by telling everyone what UNO is. UNO is a trusted single app that meets your entire financial services needs with speed and ease. Let me expand what it means. It means that when you look at your entire financial life journey, it's centered around five key themes: it's savings, it's protections, it's investments, it's transactions, and it is investments. And Uno puts all that together in one app in a trusted environment. What we mean by trusted is highly secure, highly resilient, and regulated. As you mentioned, right now, we are in the process of working with BSP to kind of obtain the necessary licenses to make this possible. And speed and ease, which is critical. Agility, that is, you deliver the products and services when one really needs it, and in a convenient, customer first, highly personalized interface. Let me also talk a minute around the philosophy of Uno. Everything what we do out here is centered around the principle of Uno, which, as all of you know, means one, starting right from the customer. Customer is our number one priority. So one app to bring all the financial needs in one place, one card for your entire life journey, same card for all transactions, for withdrawal, one experience different from another, 1 minute to kind of onboarding, 1 minute to get a loan approved, provided you meet all the qualifying criteria. Isn't that amazing? And my esteemed partners, who also panelists out here, are helping us build this all together and walking with us in this vision. And I'm sure you will hear a bit more on this journey from the partners. Thanks, Vincent.
Thanks, Manish. Maybe we can have Riddhi kind of talk about the tech aspect of working together with Manish to build his digital bank in Philippines. Riddhi, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think, and thanks for the question, first of all, Vincent, and thanks for having me. If you heard Manish, he was talking about the power of one, and that's where the name Uno comes from. And I think if you look at what Backbase, at Backbase we also talk about, is in a similar manner, a power of one, not one app, but one platform. And we started looking at Philippines back from 2016 when we started working with our first customer there, a large incumbent bank, one of the top two banks in the country. But our focus in Philippines has always been purely because of what you also mentioned, Vincent, because of the large population of unbanked and people who don't have access to financial services, especially in the provinces and the rural areas. That coupled with another very interesting insight, which we realized when we did our fintech and digital banking report of 2025 along with IDC, is that 3 out of 5 Filipinos, which is almost 60%, are willing to shift their banking relationship to a bank which is more digitally savvy. I wouldn't just call it a digital only bank or a challenger bank, but any bank which is more digitally savvy. So the intent for us, with respect to our approach towards Philippines and specifically with UNO, was to be, in very simple terms, a change agent for good. Start from a strong foundation of a modern, open digital banking platform, which will help orchestrate the experience and engagement of the end customers that UNO is targeting. And when we started talking to Manish and the entire team of UNO back in 2020, we realized that they have a very simple but clear vision where they wanted to, potentially be the first full spectrum digital bank serving both the mass as well as, the HNIs, but all of them from the power of one single platform. And that is where we found a very good synergy between the one platform story of Backbase and the one app story of UNO.
Thank you for that, Riddhi. I think there was a bit of a lag over there, but we pretty much got what you were trying to say. So let's move on to Myles, and maybe Myles, you can walk us through the experience of working together with Backbase, AWS, and UNObank to build this platform over here. Myles, you have the floor.
Thanks, Vincent. And I'd like to reiterate Manish and Riddhi. It's great to be here, and a lot of what Riddhi said resonates as well. It's the reason why Mambu sort of is really interested. But the thing for us, which we find super exciting about working with Manish, is that it's the mindset that they have about how they want to solve the problem and what they're trying to achieve. We at Mambu have been sort of in this digital banking space for a long time. We have a very geographical coverage from a world perspective. We're in 64 countries. We deal a lot with people trying to either build or create digital banks. One of the biggest challenges we see, though, is the thought process that even people who are trying to build a digital bank still need to think they need to build it the same way that traditional banks have been built. And then they find themselves getting into the problem. I think what was super refreshing and what's great about working with Manish and also with Riddhi and the AWS team is that we're all very culturally aligned, that banks don't need to be built the same way anymore. You can actually build them differently and think differently. I think the other really exciting thing for the UNO team with their vision, as there's been a lot of lessons learned globally around, like, the concept of digital banks not new. It's sort of been going on, particularly in Europe, for an extended period of time. And you've seen a lot of successes and you've seen a lot of failures. N26 is a great example of great success. You've seen some failures. You've seen some very unique value propositions like time in South Africa. So the great thing for the UNO team is they've taken the lessons learned and they've been able to construct a vision and how they want to solve the problems for their customer, how they want to work with a one platform approach. Is they're taking the best of breed capability, they're taking these lessons learned, and it's going to allow them to be incredibly successful, probably a lot faster, be very customer centric, because they are thinking differently. And that's from a Mambu perspective is why I think we're seeing such a great momentum with them, and they're getting such great prevalence in the market. And we already know they're going to be successful because it's about the mindset. Like the technology is there for banks to be different. It's just, are the bankers, and don't be offended when I call you a banker, Manish, but the bankers are really ready to think differently on how they provide that capability. And I think that's what's super exciting for an organization like ours, that we've got, traditional bankers in the mindset, hey, I don't need to be the same as the other guys. I can be different. And that's what's so great about it.
All right, thanks for that, Myles. Let's move on to Pete to get his view on things. Pete, you have the floor.
Thanks, Vincent. Listening to the other three speakers, and especially Manish, lay it out very eloquently at the start. The experience of building with a customer like Bank UNO and partners like Backbase and Mambu is definitely something that we really relish because of the cultural alignment. Now at AWS, we obviously provide a cloud platform with over 175 services and endless possibilities for our customers to build and invent and reinvent. However, what really, the core ingredient that we see as being one of the most important for any organization, large or small, as they create and as they build, is to have this kind of this mindset in their senior leadership that is willing to set aggressive top-down goals and execute against those goals, and recognize that sometimes those ideas and those goals are going to be delivered internally from their own teams, but also recognizing that sometimes the best thing to do to move with speed, and in digital banking, speed matters. The best thing to do is to find those partners who've got that alignment, who focus on, the customer of one, and work backwards from that customer of one, and have that aggressive top-down goal and that vision, and be prepared to execute against that vision as well. So from our perspective, yeah, we can talk about the technology, and we're really passionate about that at AWS, and we'll always do that. And in a market like the Philippines, where we've got teams on the ground who are working with all manner of customers across industries, that's something fantastic. But in this kind of scenario where we're building a digital bank together and doing it at speed, it's really about that cultural alignment, and it starts at the top with people like Manish and the leadership team at Bank UNO.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Because at the end of the day, the kind of synergy, the kind of cultural alignment is really important to have things moving fast, particularly, for digital banks. You kind of want to be able to scale and get out there in the market. So yeah, getting the right partners is definitely key for this. Before we move on to the next topic, anyone want to add anything else? Yes, Manish, you wanted to add something? Please go ahead.
Yeah. See, I want to go back to a very important point Myles made. There are digital banks, are many. It's all about building a successful digital bank. That's the differentiator. And another point and another concept which I think has been over exaggerated today is like bank in a box. They are modules in a box, but making a truly customer first, AI first, differentiated bank is all about the experience. A lot of orchestration is needed, and orchestration is needed not within just any partners. The partners with the right mindset, with the right technology, because what we are trying to build here is something which is not resilient only today, but it kind of bears the test of time for next 5, 10, 15 years. So you need to have the partners who have the same commitment, the same mindset of investments, the same approach. And that's the key point. And that's what definitely I believe and I hope I see in this team as we go forward.
Thank you, Manish. I think some of the things that the other panelists were talking about is also how incumbents are also moving digitally, and customers are looking for a digital solution, not just a digital only bank, right? And I think in particular, the Philippines market is unique in a sense that we've seen more incumbents kind of spinning off a unit of digital bank compared to other markets. So I'm sure when you built UNObank, you had a lot of this consideration about how do you actually differentiate yourself with these incumbents. So maybe while we still have you, can you elaborate a little bit about your strategy on that, Manish?
Thanks, Vincent. Yes, differentiation is key. And we are looking to differentiate right from the front end, the UI, UX engagement, how we interact with the clients, to the flows, to the back end, where we said the way we are building this whole bank as a build versus partnership, where we are orchestrating the tech so that we are quick to market. When you look from the customer front, you have to look at the pain areas. And as long as you are guided by the pain areas and what are the unmet needs today, and you focus on that, you will always end up with a very positive solution. So I'll just probably share 2 examples. One of the key needs out there today is about speed. Yes, credit is a challenge, borrowing is a challenge, but the challenge is compounded that most of the organizations take even 6 days, 7 days to disburse a loan. Today, with the help of the right technology, you can deliver that within a minute. Yes, don't be amazed, it's possible. And that's the kind of differentiation we plan to bring. Secondly, I think there's a pressing need. While you talk of digital, markets like Philippines or emerging markets are not yet ready for a full digital experience. There's still a need for a face behind. And again, by leveraging technologies, you can make sure that you have a very enabled field force or a contact center where actually humans behind who are talking to you leveraging the same technology. And our approach is this good combination of digital but supported by, again, humans, which enable the whole experience to be faster, smoother, and more secure for our customers.
Thank you, Manish. And I think one thing interesting about this panel is that every time Manish kind of talks about how technology is enabling certain customer delight, customer conveniences, we can actually talk to the tech partners and get them to really expand on what that is, how they've enabled it, and how does that actually differentiate than what the current market has to offer. So maybe we can start with Riddhi. Tell us more about that, Riddhi.
Yeah, I think I like to add on to what Manish said, and he made a couple of very interesting observations. One he mentioned was the concept of having, or the concept of not having a bank in a box. And we all talk about quick going live to the market very quickly, 3 months, 6 months. I have a model bank in a box. But what we end up missing there is that today customers are looking for very tailored experiences. I think Manish also spoke about personalized experience, and that is what customers are looking at. That the way I behave as a consumer, my experience with this particular financial institution has to be unique. It just cannot be the same as somebody else who is probably from a different segment of the market, who has different needs in their financial well-being or the financial life. So what we have observed, Vincent, is and this is where not just challenger banks or digital banks. Myles took an example of N26, which is one of the most successful ones. But even if you look at some of the incumbents, the large banks, and one such bank that we work in the Philippines, who is not a digital bank, very old legacy, probably the oldest bank in the Philippines. But what we saw in them, and that's what we learned from, is that there are 4 things that these banks do better. And when I'm saying these banks which are more digitally savvy. One, they have been able to cut off silos. UNObank and Manish has an advantage there because they don't have a legacy. So they don't have a legacy of too many silos in the organization. They are starting fresh, so no baggage. But overall, digital banks have this advantage of the fact that they have been able to cut off silos internally in their thought process, as well as how they're approaching customers. Second, I think that's the most important and the given, is that you have to keep customers at the center. As Manish also mentioned, that you need to focus on what customers want. And if you focus on that, then your loan as a product, your deposit as a product, your card as a product, all of that will get pushed out. You have to go to that outside in thinking versus the inside out, where rather than thinking that I have to push out a loan or a credit card or a deposit product, focus on what your customers want. And once you focus on that, your products will automatically start getting sold. The third thing is also a very, and we have seen this a lot of banks have a very legacy view of the value chain. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that, today in an age of fintechs, ecosystem, partnership, there are still some banks who are trying to do everything on their own. And that is probably not the way forward. Today it's more of a cooperation or more of a participation where you bring in people who are doing good or who are good at what they do, and you leverage their capabilities as a fintech, as a neobank, whichever way you want to call them. And then you consolidate all of that, you with a platform, with an ecosystem, so that the end customer gets benefited. They don't need to reach out to 3 or 4 different apps to get access to 3 or 4 different products. And I think the fourth and final thing, which Manish already spoke about, is about this entire concept about personalization, hyper-personalization. That can you create tailored experience for the customer, depending on the context of the customer, depending on the behavior of the customer, and depending on the background of the customer. So these are 4 trends that we have observed, Vincent, not only in Philippines, but also broadly across the region, which we keep in mind when we start talking to any bank. It's not just me going in and saying, hey, I have a platform, look at it. It's more about, are the right fundamentals in place? And these are the fundamentals that I just spoke about before we start having this discussion.
Thank you. And I think some kind of customer desires to have a flawless and smooth digital journey is quite a universal thing that's not unique to Philippines, I'm sure. And I mean, there's a few good points you brought up, right? At the end of the day, when we engage with financial services, it's not for the product, right? It's to kind of finance our lifestyle of wanting to maybe get a mortgage, get a business loan, and how do we actually create experiences around that is probably one of the key things we need to look at. Myles, what do you have to add to this conversation in terms of, from where Mambu is, how do you help banks like UNObank to differentiate themselves?
It's a really interesting point. I think a couple of points in the previous statements from the guys is, digitization isn't just by putting a new brand out there or a new app out there. Digitization from a customer experience point of view is the entire end-to-end process now. So when Manish talks about approving a loan in a minute, from a technical perspective, it really works. You can do that. The challenge you have with a lot of organizations is they think you have a great digital engagement layer to create personalization, but then the actual origination, credit approval, and the other things sit behind that process are still quite manual. They're still more traditional. So yes, the customer starts with a great experience, but they're still waiting 7 or 8 days to get their loan approved, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where, if you truly want to be a digital bank, you have to think of the complete end-to-end journey for the customer and the complete experience. And a really good example we have is a very large bank in Europe, from SME lending. They used to take 3 to 4 weeks to approve these loans. And they made a decision that they would just approach it from a technology point of view only, rather than a business perspective. So they set up a completely separate business unit, built a brand new platform from scratch, still under the bank's license, still using the same credit decisioning rules, everything. But now they're doing full approval of that loan in 15 minutes. So they didn't change their credit policy. They didn't change their risk profile. They didn't take more on board. They just made it a true digital experience and put the customer first. And so, that's where we've been seeing that we're seeing the new banks come in with that mindset, which makes them incredibly competitive very quickly, because the customers like that. It's all driven. Customers' expectations now are, I want it yesterday. I don't want it in 4 weeks' time. I want it yesterday. So you're seeing that the big banks are slowly saying, well, I've got to think this way as well. But, the UNOs of the world have an advantage, that they're not hamstrung by legacy. So they're not hamstrung by their legacy processes, by their culture, by people who have done it the same way for the past 20 years within the bank. So the ability for Manish and Uno and the team to get to market quickly, create this great customer experience, and really create a true hyper-personalized digital engagement really does give them a massive advantage. The giants will follow eventually. To Riddhi's point, they're thinking about it. They want to have a right discussion, but it's trying to get the Titanic to turn the corner rather than the speedboat, which is we consider Bank Uno a speedboat. Their ability to do things so much faster and quicker and meet the needs of their customer in the market is really where the rise of the digitals will continue, and they will continue to be very, very successful because they have that different view of how they solve the problem.
Thank you, Myles. And I think with the speed of business these days, it's important that banks are able to kind of deliver these services in a more agile way, right? Because at the end of the day, that really provides the customers with the fast decisions they need to carry on with their business. Pete, from where AWS stands, you guys are kind of the infrastructure in which a lot of these services are built. So how is AWS enabling that kind of service and experience differentiation for your customers?
Yeah, I'm conscious I don't want to be repetitive, because I think Manish and Riddhi and Myles have all articulated really well one specific thematic around personalization and hyper-personalization, which is an area where we're spending an enormous amount of time with a lot of our customers globally and here in Southeast Asia and Philippines working on it. And it's a very exciting space, but it's only as valuable, again, as this concept of working backwards from the customer of one and working backwards from this concept of, at Amazon, we say, and AWS, building a long-term partnership with our customers that is going to outlast everyone who's in this room. So our whole mindset when we work with Bank Uno is, how are we creating something together that's going to outlast all of us? And that's our mindset. So yes, we want to use technology as an enabler and leverage our artificial intelligence and machine learning services, which we've done with Bank Uno, and we're really proud of the work that we're doing together. But how do we make sure that that is built on a foundation that's going to outlast all of us? So one slight thing, I think an area where we actually really help our customers and partners like Backbase and Mambu, where we truly believe we help, is at AWS, there's no compression algorithm for experience. And we have when we think about that, what we talk about it in the context of in digital banking is around security and compliance. We have established a platform which has been established for over 15 years, working with the largest and most heavily regulated organizations and industries in the world. When you adopt AWS, you adopt the best practice security that all of these companies that have been working with us and that we've been working with for this period of time have developed together. So what we're pretty proud of and very proud to work with partners and customers of is that we are creating a secure platform that enables customers to move quickly with confidence. And that we actually see security as an innovation enabler for our customers, especially in financial services and especially in digital banking.
Thanks for that, Peter. And I think we spoke a lot about ensuring we have the right partners to kind of build towards our goals for the customers. So we have a question here from the audience, and I think perhaps Manish, you can take this. How do you decide who are the right partners? What are the criteria you look at when you select partners like Backbase, Mambu, and AWS?
Because this is something which we go through every day when we are kind of looking out for our tech partners. I think the starting point is we are looking for companies or partners which are the products of which are secure, resilient, and scalable. Absolutely no compromise out there. Even if slightly expensive, this is something where one cannot make a compromise or cut corners. Second on the list comes agility and flexibility. I go back to the statement I made earlier. What we are making today is we are not making something for next 1, 2, 3, 4 years. We are making something which is foolproof. And we are making something which is brought out of the market in the right time. Going back, say, let's take a COVID example. There were many, many banks who struggled because the need of the market was to kind of offer flexibility and solutions which were demanded on the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, not 6 years or 8 years. So that flexibility, the agility is very, very important. And third is an alignment of interest and commitment to keep investing, because the whole technology stack is moving northwards, is improving. And it is important that, like we at UNO, we are making the investments to make sure that we stay on the top end of innovation. It is very important that our partners also stay ahead of the game. And all three of the partners who are here with me on the panel, clearly, as we know, they like our call on that is that they're very, very committed to this process.
Very cool. Thank you for that, Manish. While I still have you, I think I also kind of want to direct another question at you, because obviously every market is different in ASEAN, and there no two countries in ASEAN has similar circumstances, right? Everybody's got their own unique circumstances. And with Philippines, when you built for Philippines, what were some unique considerations you took into place, and how did you strategize around that?
Yeah, absolutely true. Let me talk about couple out here. Let's start with our main product proposition, credit, because credit is a challenge in Asia overall, but it's a bigger challenge in Philippines, with only less than 10% of the people borrowing from an organized sector, or in terms of consumer credit to GDP penetration uh, of Philippines being the lowest among its peers out there. So our entire approach of enabling credit to make sure that we cast the net wide, to make sure that we approve loans within minutes, make sure that we go down and offer loans at age brackets of 20, 20, 21 years or even younger as what regulation allows. Those are some of the path changing steps which we are trying to enable. The second is a point I had touched upon earlier. One of the big resistance to moving to digital, apart from, of course, the considerations around security, which I won't talk about and leave it with to my partners, the other is around this faceless nature, or the kind of understanding that a digital bank could be faceless. So what we are definitely very committed to in our approach is that though it's a digital bank, but there would be always a reach out. There would be contact centers where technology is leveraged to kind of have seamless interfaces between a bot and say a human as and when needed. Similarly, we are investing in technology to create digital twins, which is an app which our field agents will carry, in the sense that if someone is having a trouble on onboarding or anything, there could be assistance which could be provided, whereas the field agents have a mirror image of the process flow which you have gone through, again in a very secure and a reliable environment. So those are some of the tweaks which we are bringing. The last one, of course, one app, because we believe that there is a lot of leverage, there's a lot of optimization, and there's a lot of cost reduction if you are able to deliver your entire life cycle of financial needs in one place. And also, it's a lot of less rework.
Thank you, Manish. And really earlier you mentioned that you guys have done some research, some study in Philippines. So what are some unique considerations that you think digital banks and even incumbent banks need to have when building these kind of services for the Filipino population?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't generalize it only to Filipino population. Yeah, there are some unique aspects about the Filipino population which I'll touch upon. But I think, when what we have seen is when a digital or any bank is trying to embark on a so-called digital transformation, we encourage them to ask 4 questions. And we get into more of a consultative discussion rather than, as I said, just a platform discussion. And these 4 questions are very simple. One, as a bank, how do you distinguish yourself from others? Now, you heard from Manish that in UNO, they have this very simple philosophy of one app and the power of one, and that is probably the main distinguishing factor that UNO has. But we ask this question to every bank, that how do you distinguish yourself from others? The second question that we ask is, are you focusing enough on your customer? And again, I don't want to iterate it multiple times, but I think customer focus is very important. The third is, probably from a business perspective, you're distinguishing well and you're focusing on customers, but how do you really benefit from the scales of, from the aspects of, reusability, repeatability, plug and play, flexibility? How do you scale up? What thoughts have you, made around that? What technologies are you investing in to do that, thing in terms of scaling up? And finally is, it's good to have a good strategy in place. It's good to have a good technology in place. But how do you sustain this journey? It's not about, I think Manish also mentioned, it's not about the next 6 months or 12 months or the next 1 year. It's about the next 5 to 10 years. How are you able to sustain this journey? And one of the major mistakes that I've seen a lot of banks do, including banks in the Philippines, is that when they are looking at digital transformation, in their mind, still it's about doing an as-is replacement. That I'm going to replace my as-is offerings with probably a slightly different technology, which will give a little bit better experience. But they're not really trying to use that opportunity to optimize the business processes. And I'll give you a very quick example, and probably Myles would be able to relate to something like this. We were talking to a very, very big bank in the Philippines, and when they said we want to do a refresh and we want to do a transformation, they came to us saying that in our current digital offering, in our current app, we have 70 features, 70, and we want to replicate all of that in the new app. Our first question is why? I mean, first of all, why do you have 70 features? And second is, why do you want to replicate all of that? Have you done enough study to figure out how many of those 70 features are being used by your current customers? So they went back, they took some time, and they came back with data which showed that out of those 70, there were just 6, so less than 10%, 6 features which are contributing to almost 94% of their transactions on the digital channels, which means that the remaining 64 features that they were talking about is contributing to just 5 or 6%. So these are the sort of questions that we really need to ask. And when these guys were able to get that data, they said, okay, it does not really make sense for me to spend 12 months or 18 months trying to replicate the same 70 features. Let's focus on the 6, and let's focus on how do we make those 6 much better, much more intuitive, much more contextual, and something that, as I think Vincent, you also mentioned, something that the customers would love, right? So these are some common things that we have seen. Again, from a larger market trend, yes, there are trends which, as I said earlier, 3 out of 5 Filipinos are probably going to shift to banks which are more digital in nature. Now, does that put a lot of large incumbents at threat? Possibly the answer is yes. As internet connectivity grows in the Philippines, it goes to the rural areas. As more and more people get access to digital solutions, probably the bigger boys might have something to think about. Yeah, so that's just my 2 cents on it.
Thanks. But I guess sometimes less is more, right? I mean, sometimes I feel like banks like to kind of brag about I have 70 features. Just that it sounds nice in press releases. Maybe that's why they do that sometimes. Myles, you wanted to add something?
Maybe I was just going to add, like, I'll take it to the next level, which is we were talking to a big incumbent bank who are proud that they had 1,000 different products. So like it's 1,000 different loans, deposits, transaction. We went, really? And they said, yep, we just want to migrate the whole lot. And we said, have you ever done some true analysis? I went, oh. So they went away and came back, and they actually found that they only really had 90 products. The other 910 were something that someone had dreamt up, and they only had like 3 or 4 customers using them. So they then didn't have to think about migrating 1,000 products. They really only had to focus on the 90, and then they could upsell people off. And then, so the actual timeline to transition, the cost, etc., went from here to here. So same to Riddhi's point, do you need 70 features on your mobile app? No. Do you need 1,000 products? No. It's that, again, comes back to that same thing. It's banks don't need to be the same way that they've always been and thinking differently. It's amazing when you get into these conversations and you just challenge the norm a little bit and you actually watch the light bulb go on. And it's just, I guess they're hardwired that this is the way we've just always done it. And that's, again, circling back to Manish and Uno, they're in a very unique position because they've got all these lessons learned and they can actually just come to the market with a completely different proposition, which is what customers are looking for.
Thank you for that, Myles. And I guess, it's easier to not be business as usual when you're a new business, right? You come up with a lot of new and interesting ideas. Manish, you wanted to add something as well?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to the point on customer first. I know this point has been battered to death, but it is very important, and I'll digress and share a story. It might take a minute. So I was on a vacation in Bali, and I used my ATM card in one of the convenience stores to withdraw some money, and I got distracted and left the card there. And boom, in 3 minutes, I get an SMS. Approximately $500 had been charged. I figured out, I'm still in the store. I figured out this is a big misuse. Great use of technology. In 3 minutes, I'm updated about it. And then while I'm panicking, and I bank with a very, very big international bank, and I try to go to the app, and I'm trying to kind of find out how to block my card. You wouldn't believe, it took me 10 minutes, couldn't find. I called the call center to Singapore, in that excitement, I didn't think of using a Viber or anything. It's an international call. Later, the bill came another $400 or something. Net, 30, 35 minutes goes, new SMSs are coming, charges are building up. And what was needed was a simple button, which is freeze your card, which today, when you look at the new fintechs, most of them have this button right up on the top. Whereas most of the traditional banks, and the bank which I'm talking about right now, also it took few months after that to come up with that button. So these are simple things, but when you are building a bank today, you have to think of not the 70 apps, not the 1,000 apps. You have to think of what are those 7, 8, or 10 things which are key, which makes a difference. And if you have that approach only, then you will be a game changer.
I completely believe you because I've been on that end of the experience as well. And yeah, I would wish that my bank had a feature like that in Malaysia as well. Pete, anything to add before we move on to the next conversation?
No, I just wanted to echo Manish's point, and I think Riddhi might have made a point about this as well, is the more, and we're seeing it more, which is really something I'm optimistic about, but the more sort of supply chain thinking and logistics style end-to-end supply chain thinking that is becoming embedded in the digital banking space. In other words, we want to have a beautiful front end, and we want to have wonderful CX, and we want to be differentiated and hyper-personalized. But I also want to ensure that, and talking with one of our digital native financial services customers, I also want to make sure that I'm not repeating the mistakes of some legacy banking practices that I'd seen, where collections teams, for example, collections teams are a hugely important part of the supply chain, the banking supply chain, but often a very underinvested part of the banking supply chain. And how do you automate that part of the banking supply chain? So as you grow, as you scale as a digital bank, and as you grow with customer acquisition, you're not causing yourself a middle and back office nightmare down the track around collections, reconciliations, clearances, things that we don't necessarily talk about in webinars up front because they might not gather attention immediately. But gee, they're important to any financial services institution. And we've got to focus on that full end-to-end transaction life cycle and apply the learnings of maybe not financial services companies, apply the learnings of logistics companies, shipping companies. And I think that curiosity that we're seeing in a lot of the, not just digital banking, but a lot of the banking leaders like Manish coming through of, okay, what are the learnings that we can take from an industry that is not financial services? And how can we apply that to the way that we automate and design not just the front end, but these gotchas, these parts of the life cycle that all of us as bankers or ex-bankers have been tripped up on in the past. And that's something I'm very excited about in this space, is the ability not just to improve the customer experience, but improve the employee experience as well, right? So that's an exciting area.
Yeah, and there's some pretty good points about drawing inspiration from other industries, right? Because if you don't go ahead and do that, some of these industries are going to apply for a license and just take away your customers. We're seeing that happening in other markets as well, in Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and whatnot. Thanks for that view, Pete. So let's move on. And I think we talked a lot about how there are a lot of features and a lot of banks are focused on these features without really thinking about whether the customer is really using them. And I think the same can be said about technology. Sometimes as techies, we tend to chase the next shiny thing in tech, right? For a while, I see everybody sending press releases with blockchain and this and that. So how do we avoid getting lost in all this next shiny thing and really translate investment in technology into business outcomes for customers? Riddhi, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say, Vincent, a very interesting question. Yeah, I would say, again, something that we have, I think Manish and I both have spoken about, and Myles also, is that all these technology investments have to be driven by a business need. It cannot be an investment that a bank or a financial institution is making just because you're reaching end of life, for that matter. But there are a lot of times where you hear that, we are doing this infrastructure upgrade because we are reaching end of life, or we're doing this core banking upgrade because we are reaching end of life. That cannot be your imperative for a change. The imperative has to be driven by what the business is asking for, and essentially which means what the customer is asking for. I'll give you an example. A bank in Asia, not in the Philippines, that I was talking to, more on the transaction banking and wholesale banking side. All this while, they were very happy doing their cash management operations on a separate portal and their trade finance operations on a separate portal. And they were happy with it. They were doing pretty well. Two different platforms, one for cash, one for trade. But when they started going back to their customers and they started asking their customers, what is that one thing that you would want us to change? The uniform feedback that they got is, guys, can't you consolidate your cash and trade on one single portal? Because end of the day, I am a corporate and I am doing both payments and collections with you. And I'm doing a lot of trade instruments with you. Why do I need to log into different systems? Please consolidate. So what I'm trying to say is that, and then that bank has started on a discussion in terms of how do we bring all of that into one single platform. So the point that I'm trying to make is that unless and until there is this very big, strong business driver, and it could be anything, it could be outdated customer experience, it could be the time that a business is taking to launch new features in the market once they have the release cycles, how can you shorten them? So it could be any of these drivers. But unless and until the technology investment is backed by one of these drivers, it just won't make sense. It will just be a few $1 million that will be out of the bank, but it won't really add any tangible value. You take the example that Manish spoke about, dishing out a loan in 1 minute. Now that's a fascinating business driver to work towards. Now, can a technology combination, let's say, Mambu, Backbase, AWS, can we come together to serve that particular business need? And once we are going to work backwards from that, that underlying problem statement or underlying mission, then these technology investments and these technology discussions would make much more sense than just being, a simple one-to-one technology one. Yeah. So.
Thank you for that. And I'm sensing, throughout the entire conversation we've been having today, a lot of it is themed around design thinking, right? Kind of designing your product with an end in mind. Myles, what is your view on that? How do you think banks should, or even your customers should look at translating investment into technology into business outcomes?
For me, I think the important thing at the moment is that banks need to start future-proofing this, because the markets is moving so quickly. Customers' expectations are so fast. The bank of today will not be the bank of tomorrow, or will be the bank into the future. And to Manish's point that he raised early on is that the banks now need to think of it, technology as an enabler for them to allow to pivot and do things differently to align with their customer expectations, putting their customer first and not box themselves into a corner. And again, to Riddhi's point, so I think those banks that are really looking at the technology investments to actually future-proof and give them that flexibility moving forward are the ones that are positioning themselves to be very successful. You see too many banks fall into the trap of, I do it this way right now, just show me how to do it exactly the same way on a newer platform. You need to have that customer-led thinking and design thinking, rather than this is how the bank wants to operate thinking and then deliver that to the customer. I think that is critical to the success of financial institutions going forward. And, I think that's, again, but that's one thing I really believe Uno's got right. They're approaching it the right way. So to Manish's point, that how as technology looks today, and you hear Mambu talk about what we call composable banking, but what we believe that is that you bring an ecosystem of partners together to give Manish and his team the flexibility to be the organization they want to be. But how they look in 12 months or 24 months may be different because of the successes they're having, what they want to do in the market, who they want to go after. They need that flexibility, that they have platforms that can support that, which is really, really good. And I think, that's where, I think that's the type of maturity that's now starting to come into the market. and you're seeing it a lot more with this, what I would call the second generation of digital banks, the rise of them, that they are really approaching it that way rather than just trying to be a digital version of themselves as they were 30 years ago.
Vincent, can I add a point to that?
Sure, go ahead, Manish.
So yeah, so as Myles was saying, while technology is a huge enabler, creating a successful digital bank, there are three other things which are very, very important. Starting from the real pain points or unmet need as of today. What are you trying to solve? A solid business proposition. Because if you are weak in a business proposition, both as Myles and as Riddhi was mentioning, technology will become a burden. It will become a blocker rather than an enabler. And the third one around that is the whole flexibility and the scalability. How you kind of approach the entire build out, the best in class execution. You bring the three together, leverage the technology, and then the costs become a tailwind rather than the headwind. You reach that point of inflection where each marginal expansion or casting the net wide is very, very economical. So that's the key, and that's the inflection point we want to work with these partners and reach, so that we can then really play our game to the next level, cast the net wide, and help the unbanked getting banked, or widen the financial inclusion spectrum.
Thanks for adding to that. I mean, you've really given us something to kind of think about. Pete, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think just quickly at AWS, we say that about 90% of our decisions to build something new, to release a new service, to develop a new feature, 90% of that comes directly from customer feedback. So we don't sit in science labs detached from our customers and just develop because we think it's a good idea. Now, there's about 10% where it's true invention, but even those true inventions are based on data, they're based on experience, and they're based on insights. So we align so strongly with the likes of UNO and Backbase and Mambu and the community who are building in the digital banking space, because in our own culture, we simply don't build things and release them unless our customers are specifically giving us that feedback and telling us that this is important to them. So, again, it comes back to the cultural alignment, and that cultural alignment will help us move with speed and ensure that we don't get distracted by the shiny new objects, because there are more and more shiny new objects, and there will be. The one thing that is guaranteed is there will be even more shiny objects for us all to get distracted by. So I think staying very close to a true north of our customers, our customer feedback, and then leveraging that to build and develop, that's going to be critical for success for any heritage bank or new digital bank as well.
Thanks, Pete. That's an endless quest, chasing for shiny objects, right? So yeah, before we move on, Riddhi, you wanted to add something, right?
Just a very quick one there is, and I think Manish can also substantiate it, to actually complement this entire business-driven technology investment. At Backbase, what we have started doing is we have started designing the MVP, or the minimum viable product of customers, along with them. With UNO, we spent more than 2 weeks. We asked so many questions to Manish and his entire founding team that at a point of time they got a bit flustered that why are you guys asking so many questions? But the reason why we ask these questions is, and I think Manish can complement it, is that finally we helped Manish and his team come out with what his launch product should be like, and looking at market trends, looking at user feedback, and all of that put together. So that's just the one point that I wanted to mention, that at Backbase we have taken this very seriously, the entire customer centricity, and we help customers design their minimum viable product, the minimum marketable product, purely because it's a business decision, not so much a technology decision. That's the only point that I wanted to add.
I think your team has been asking his team so many questions that his internet connection sensed it and disconnected Manish at that point. All right. I'd love to carry on and discuss further, but I'm afraid we are running short on time. So very quickly, maybe before we go, we can start with Manish again to maybe share some closing thoughts with our audience and also some predictions about where you see the scene heading medium to long term. Manish, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vincent. I think goes without saying that the future is around digitalization. If you look at all the data points today, I'll share two key numbers. One which talks about over the next 2 or 3 years, 40% of the people who have traditional bank accounts are going to move to a digital only play. That is one. The second is that the revenue estimates globally of traditional banks or traditional methods of banking is likely to contract by 35%. So what these two things mean that we are going to see a lot more digital action, both from new players like us as well as existing players who have no choice but to kind of have a digital proposition as a sub part of that. If you look at in Philippines itself, as from your central in Philippines, from the central bank governor talks about 50% target of all digital payments by 2023, by the end of his term. In terms of numbers, they're talking about that today the value of digital payments is 10 billion, and in and say 3 to 4 years, not even 4 years now, 3 years, talking about 28 billion by 2024. So that's huge. So one thing is for sure that there will be more players, there will be more competition, and the winners will be, again, coming back to the same point, those who are able to smartly address the unmet needs, who are going to have a scalable business proposition so that they don't get shut down, as we have seen, which happens with few banks, and those who have used the right parameters and right partners in building up their technology stack. I'll take a point because I was browsing through, so it was not the internet connection. I was silly to have clicked the wrong box. I was going through a comment, and there was a very interesting question asked by someone: was, is there a should you build everything on your own, or is there a shame to kind of partner and build your technology stack? Let me tell you that today's world is all about partnerships and ecosystem. It's all about timing. It's all about being quick. One has to focus on what one is really good at and leverage and build this entire ecosystem with the right partners. Not only the tech partners. When we operate in Philippines, we are looking forward to partner with the existing banks, the existing fintechs, the insurance companies, the other companies, because there is a huge potential to kind of all of us work together and deliver solutions which move the needle hugely for the customer. So those are my closing thoughts on this whole proposition.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Manish. And I think that's a good. You're welcome. Thank you. And I think that's a good point, right? Because at the end of the day, the end consumer doesn't care if you partnered someone to build that convenience or you built it yourself, as long as it's convenient for them. That's really the key thing. Let's move on to Pete. Pete, what is your closing thoughts and predictions for the medium to long term, Pete?
So predictions are difficult, but my closing thoughts are pretty straightforward. The leaders in this space will be the ones that make speed a choice, for their decision making. But the leaders will be chased, and that means a real focus. And this is an area at AWS we actually are truly very passionate about spending time with our customers of all sizes on. Is it's going to become really interesting around talent and people, and how our leaders in the digitalization space, whether that be in digital banking, broader financial services, or out in other industries, how customers and companies in this space hire, develop, and retain the best talent. Because that speed, that choice of speed that you make is going to be very reliant on your partners that you select, and of course, the teams that you develop and build internally. So a closing thought is, and if I talk about the Philippines, this is something that I think is just an incredibly exciting opportunity in the Philippines, where we look at the quality of the talent and the quality of the builders in the market there. and it's incredibly exciting and inspiring to see what's happening in the market. But it's really important that we have this culture of training, skills, enablement, continuous learning across all of us, people like AWS, our customers, our partners as well. But because I think the leaders in this space are going to have the advantage of making speed a choice, but they will be chased. So a real focus on people and talent is my prediction.
I really like that line, making speed a choice. It's a good one. Myles, what are your closing thoughts and predictions?
I'll be quick because I know we're short on time, but I'll just go back to something I said at the very start. Banks don't need to be built the way they used to be, and they need to be built for the future. I think that's and they need to be able to go with where the market, because the speed and the hyper speed and the personalization of where banking's going to go is going to continue to change. And earlier to the question before, no, you don't need to own the tech, but you also don't need to outsource all the tech. Hybrid models work. Mambu, we see people do everything by pulling partners together and creating their own Lego blocks of what they want their bank to be. We see others that might take a couple of key components like a Mambu and build what they want around us. Or we see, even existing banks will grab a couple of key components like a Backbase and a Mambu and then use some of their existing. So all the models are out there. But for me, the final thing is that for those of you that are considering building a digital bank on the call, or for those of you that are existing banks on the call, you don't have to do it the same way. And there's a lot of lessons that have been learnt out there in the market over the past 5, 6, 7 years that the likes of Pete and the AWS team, the likes of Riddhi and ourselves can really help you with. And, again, it's a pleasure to be on this call because, we meet and greet a lot of people, but it's really great when you actually come across someone like Manish and his team that they've checked all those key boxes and they know they want to approach it differently. And that's what's actually really inspiring. I think, I'm sure Pete and Riddhi will agree, that you get to work with someone who actually wants to change the game and do something differently. I just don't want to be a digital version of what's been out there before. So, thanks, Vincent. It's been great to be here.
Likewise, thank you for your thoughts. And last but not least, Riddhi, what are your closing thoughts and some predictions?
Yeah, I'll keep it very quick. Not really predictions, but more of observations. I think the first observation is that, and since we're talking so much about Philippines, is that Philippines, we truly believe, is entering a golden age in digital banking. It's right at the cusp of where things can be taken to the next level, purely because there are so many people who don't have access to basic banking services, right? So do you invest in physical or do you invest in digital? And that's where we believe that Philippines is in a very right time and right place. I think Pete mentioned, as well as Manish mentioned, that there's going to be much more not really competition, but I see that as a lot of partnership between traditional banks, insurance players, fintechs, neobanks, all of that coming together and giving a much, much better experience. And when I say experience, it's not just about the look and feel, but the overall experience that a consumer has from a banking perspective. So this entire thing about ecosystem and partnership with open banking also spreading its wings more and more in Asia, it's really going to benefit end consumers like all of us. Our experience of banking is going to drastically change in the next few years. The last thing which I would like to add here is, and that is something that Myles mentioned very nicely, is this hybrid model. We have seen banks thinking about build. We have seen banks thinking about buy. You don't need to be at the two extremes. You just don't. And if you decide to be on one of these extremes, you'll probably face more challenges. That is where a hybrid model, the experiences that we have learned, Backbase, Mambu, AWS, where you can do things in a much more composable manner as Lego building blocks. And that is purely from a banking perspective. Start looking at things in smaller chunks rather than as one single big block which you need to build completely grounds up, or you need to buy and deploy. So just a few observations, but I think end of the day, as an end consumer, we are going to be winners purely because of the investments and the thinking that is coming into banking.
Thank you for that. And I think, we are indeed living in the most exciting time for financial services. We're seeing change that we've not cannot even imagine a decade ago. So this is a pretty cool time to be alive. With that, only leaves me the honor and pleasure of thanking all the panelists for joining us today, and the over 200 to 300 of you actually tuning in to listen to us live. Very glad that you guys could join us, and have a wonderful day ahead. Take care now. Bye bye.
Thank
Yes,
you,
guys.
Vincent.
Bye.